I'm not a nuclear power expert, but as you say, this is the largest nuclear facility in Europe. 6 reactors. They haven't been actually producing power since 22, but you do need electricity constantly to enable the cooling systems to work to keep the reactor under control. And there are a whole mass of different generators in place, and therefore there's a lot of redundancy, as you might imagine. The challenge, of course, is that any nuclear reactor, you do not want to have explosions near it. And they've had a couple of direct hits on the plant by drones. Now, it is worth remembering these reactors are built to withstand an impact from an airline rather than a drone. So it's very likely to be fine. But you can't take chances with facilities like that, particularly when Chernobyl's just up the road, as a stark reminder of what happens when it goes wrong.
Times Radio. It is now 13 minutes past 4. The UN nuclear watchdog has intervened after a drone attack on a nuclear power station in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia, warning that the bombing risks a major nuclear accident. It's the power plant with 6 nuclear reactors. It is on the front line of the war in Russian-controlled territory. It is round about 300 miles from the site of the Chernobyl nuclear plant. Now, while this plant has not been operational since 2022, it does require a constant supply of power. Russia has accused Ukraine of the bombing. Ukraine denies responsibility for the attack. Let's talk to retired Air Vice Marshal Sean Bell. Sean Bell, first of all, can we just have a word from you on why the plant needs power? This is because of a reactor that's cooling, is that right?
Yes, I'm not a nuclear power expert, but as you say, this is the largest nuclear facility in Europe. 6 reactors. They haven't been actually producing power since 22, but you do need electricity constantly to enable the cooling systems to work to keep the reactor under control. And there are a whole mass of different generators in place, and therefore there's a lot of redundancy, as you might imagine. The challenge, of course, is that any nuclear reactor, you do not want to have explosions near it. And they've had a couple of direct hits on the plant by drones. Now, it is worth remembering these reactors are built to withstand an impact from an airline rather than a drone. So it's very likely to be fine. But you can't take chances with facilities like that, particularly when Chernobyl's just up the road, as a stark reminder of what happens when it goes wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you about that, what possible impact a drone strike could have. You seem pretty confident that actually the reactor is made of such strong stuff that the answer is probably not much damage, really.
Yeah, it's not so much. One of the worries, we haven't really been covering this for about a year, really, but one of the worries before was that when the electricity supplies, it was on the main grid, it got taken off the main grid. And if the electricity supplies go onto the backup, the electricity authority, the nuclear authority, just turned around and said, you don't want your nuclear facilities running on backup regularly. And unfortunately, they're regularly running on their generators to generate the power to keep the cores cool. And that's the big worry, really. It's less about the impact to the plant, but I wouldn't want to trivialize it. Clearly, it is vital, but the main threat is if those electricity generators were hit, that would stop the cooling and the reactor could get out of control. But I say, unfortunately, it's just the position of this. The Russians are on the front foot at the moment in Ukraine, and Ukrainians are struggling to hold them back. And that's the real story at the moment.
Yeah. Why would Ukraine attempt a drone strike on this plant if indeed they did do it?
Well, they wouldn't, bluntly. I mean, unless you were trying to do false flag operations, in other words, get the Russians to blame, it doesn't make any sense at all. The trouble is the front line has been moving. The Russians, I say, are on the front foot. We'd had a lot of hope that Ukraine might be on the front foot after its much vaunted spring offensive last year. That didn't move the front lines. And as we speak at the moment, the Russians are inching forward around the Donbass and pushing ahead around Zaporizhzhia. And anywhere on the front line, you're going to have stray bullets flying around and drones running around. And it looks very unlikely that either side would deliberately target the Zaporizhzhia nuclear facility. But, that's the reports that are coming out.
Yeah.
So we have to take them at face value.
So what? It was an accident then?
Well, again, the problem is you shouldn't be using a nuclear facility. It's a vast, sprawling nuclear facility there. You shouldn't be using it to hide military forces in. And there was satellite and video evidence that the Russians had put a lot of military vehicles inside the nuclear plant, deliberately designed because they knew they couldn't be targeted there. Now, that's actually illegal under international law. but the Russians are doing a lot of stuff that potentially is illegal under international law. And there's no doubt that the Ukrainians would have been tempted to try to attack the Russians that were hiding within that facility. I'm speculating now because I don't know the truth behind it, but in the fog of war, particularly when the Russians are not paying by the law of armed conflict, there are lots of explanations as to why this might have happened.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem absolutely crazed when you analyse it that either side would take a chance on this. Russian populations are as likely to be impacted as Ukrainian. Surely it's just utter madness.
Well, unfortunately, Jane, you're absolutely right. But then I have to say, as a sort of a warrior from the last 20, 30 years in military, war is just carnage. It doesn't make any sense. We're seeing that in Gaza. We've seen that in Ukraine. It's a horrible, horrible undertaking. Millions of people have had to leave their homes. Hundreds of thousands of casualties in Ukraine. 2 years of war, and it's grinding on. It doesn't seem to have any end in sight, and particularly if the weapons don't get delivered to help Ukraine, I think it's going to be a very bleak summer for the Ukrainian military.
Thank you very much. Well, I think good to talk to you one day about something cheery, Sean. Let's see if we can
I
arrange
agree.
that.
I agree.
Thank you. Retired Air Vice Marshal Sean Bell. It's hello. Hello. It's 18 minutes past 4.